everybody, to Torah Queries with Rabbi Sue Levi Elwell, brought to you. And so I'm going to pass it over to Sue. But I just want to say that Ellen Poster and I, as co-chairs of PRISM, really are so excited that there's this many people for Torah Queries. So tell all your friends. Thanks. Take it away, Sue.
Thank you. Bruchim habaim. Welcome, everyone. Because we only have an hour, we're going to dive right in. And you can see each other, and I can call on you. And I realize that right off, I failed to send my tech angel, who tonight is Jerry Silverman, the prayer with which we begin. So I will get my act together better, and I'm going to just share it with you. And those of you who know it, great. And those of you who don't, you'll have it up on your screen next week. So it's the same beginning as many of our prayers, which thank God for the opportunity to do something holy. The words are Asher Kidshanu b'mitzvotav, who has granted us your mitzvot, your opportunities for holiness. And then we say la'asok b'divrei Torah, to soak in, to bask in, to busy ourselves with the words of Torah. So let's just take one moment to kind of focus and realize the magic and the weight of Zoom that brings us together. May we soon be in person in the next, by 2022. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok divrei Torah. We thank you, O Holy One, for giving us the opportunity to busy ourselves with study. So welcome to all of you, to John, to Danny, to Fred, to Rachel, to Francis, to Susan, to Rachel. Maybe I said Rachel twice because of where my eyes went, to Hector, to Wesley, to Muriel. Jerry is calling himself Road of Shalom tonight. To Jane and
Jackie just came in, I think.
Good. Jackie, welcome. To Jane and Ben Sion, to Heshi and David, to Ellen and to Steve. So we're here and we are entering into Mishpatim. And last week was a really big week. We weren't together. We were together for Bishalach. And last week was Yitro, which was the giving of the Torah and the giving of the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. And some of you may know there's a tradition that when they are read, if we are in synagogue, we stand up to hear them read. And this week's portion is a continuation of laws beyond the 10. And what we're going to hear tonight, or take a look at, are the laws that are also called the laws of the covenant. So we're going to put up the first page. Thank you to Jerry. Well,
you'll tell me if this is the one. Hold on.
Okay, it's
That
the
one?
outline. That's it. And
Good.
I apologize for it not being quite as clear. It's because I took a picture of it out of my book. So I'm holding up the book that I took this picture out of. It's the Torah, a Women's Commentary. There are lots of copies at Rodef, and it's a book that I had the honor of working on. And one of the things I love about the book, I may have mentioned before, but please, you're going to put up with me, is that every portion has an outline in it. In the very beginning of the portion. And this is because the primary editor, the first editor of the book, Dr. Tamara Eskenazi, this is one of the things she gives to her students to do when they're taking a Torah class. Actually, Jerry, it's obscured on the screen that we see.
Obscured. Is it clear now?
Yeah,
You may want to just share what you're sharing instead of whole screen.
What's that?
You may want to just share the one document if you can. I know it's not the simplest thing, but it's cleaner for us.
Well, I was trying to find the email. If somebody else can take care of this, maybe Susan, you're good at this. Can you please send the
I did.
phone number for Marilyn
I
Essler
already did.
to Marilyn? Oh,
I gave it to Jackie in the chat already.
oh, wow.
Susan,
You're
thank
fast.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to clear the screen of the other stuff now. How's that? Is that
Great.
better?
Almost.
What else?
It's really better if you just share
Bottom.
one thing, to be honest.
Wait, what? What?
It's cleaner if you just share the one document than versus whole screen.
Hold on, let me look.
Or if you click the dash to minimize them.
Hold on.
Yep. The fun of Zoom.
How about now?
Much
Yeah.
better. That's perfect. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thanks for telling me.
Okay, so as you see, it says outline. And Dr. Eskenazi does this for every single Parsha. And it's particularly helpful, I think, because it organizes what's going on. And each Parsha is so rich, and particularly Parshiot like this one that have a lot going on. So you see that it's called at the top, the Covenant Collection, and very intentionally, they've called it this because it really is a collection of laws and of different kinds of laws. So after an introduction, that is one verse that we're going to look at in a minute, we see that they're from chapter 21, second verse to chapter 22, 16, there are 5 points here of civil and criminal matters that are dealt with. And like every portion we deal with, we could spend, a month just on this one portion because, and particularly, I don't know if I have any attorneys in the house today, but there are, of course, we've got a tradition that has a very rich corpus of legal isms and things that particularly tickle the fancy of folks who go into law. And many of you, maybe some of you, have considered it or played with it, or it's part of, I think, the Jewish tradition of being pretty both argumentative, but also wanting to see many sides of each issue. So here you see the particular things that are focused on here. And then in number C, there are assorted religious and social precepts that many of the commentators say, well, wait, why did they clump this with that? And that's part of the fun of getting to study this together. We're going to take a look at particularly chapter 23, because it goes on with the treatment of the enemy, the needy, and the stranger. And then at the end of the chapter, where it says the covenant ratification ritual, I'm going to make sure that we get there so that you'll get to see after these laws are presented, then what happens? How do the people respond? So Jerry, I'd like the next
Okay, hold
page,
on a second
please,
here.
which is the very beginning of the Parsha.
Yep.
And those of you who have books, please follow along. But I didn't want to disadvantage anyone who didn't happen to have a book. And this way also, if you have a book that you'd like to mark or put a sticky in, and please ask questions as we go. All right. That's not the one I want. I want the one that begins with the very beginning.
Yeah, it's the same one. It's just.
Oh, all right, great. You're up at the top of the page. Thank you very much.
You see the whole thing? You see the whole thing now?
Yep, that's
Oh, good.
exactly right. And I'll
Okay.
tell you when to move it down. Okay, great. So I also put on this that the date. So today is both the 9th of February and the 27th of Shvat. Last time we met, it was right around Tu B'Shvat. And now we're coming to the end of this month of Shvat. And this Shabbat will be Rosh Chodesh. This actually Thursday and Friday are Rosh Chodesh Adar. And Adar is a very beloved month because it's the month of Purim. And some of you are involved in some really fun stuff that's happening at RS around Purim. So just thought I would mention that you can see already when we have a high number in the upper 20s that we're about to have a new month. And we have the good luck to always be having two calendars at once. So we enrich our lives that way. All right. As you already know, because we've been studying together now, our portions are named for the very first words of the portion. And the Hebrew sentence here, actually, I've got a good Hebrew reader right here, Jerry. Read that first line.
Sure. Va'ela mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem.
Okay. And you can read the English too.
Oh, that's a struggle. These are the rules that you shall set before them.
All right. So what is the word for rules that you just read?
Mishpatim.
All right. And that's the name of the portion, Mishpatim. So those of you who know modern Hebrew know that a Beit Mishpat is a court, and Beit Mishpat HaElyon is the highest court in the state of Israel. And the next time you go to Israel, may that be soon, I highly recommend that you visit the Supreme Court in Israel. It's a spectacular building, and you can go as a tourist and take a look. And the word mishpat by itself means trial. So a person who has to go to a trial, and how matim, how appropriate that we're talking about this today. Okay, so this is the portion that we're looking at. And then I wanted to take a look at this verse, chapter 22, verse 20, which many commentators say is the core of these laws in this chapter. So just because I'm looking at you guys, that I see your faces, so I'm going to ask David to read this next line in English, please. But you have to unmute yourself, my friend.
Sorry.
Thank you.
You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Thank you. All right. I would love to see some hands raised. I might need some help in seeing you because I can't see you all at once when we're looking at a document. So who would like to comment on this particular phrase that pops up here in this list of covenant laws? Have you heard it before? Does it appear other times in the Torah? Does it feel really familiar? Heshi?
I mean, it feels familiar in terms of social justice. In today's parlance, you could talk about not oppressing or doing any, or not being not oppressing the stranger, not doing anything that's disrespectful, kind of like, love your neighbor. But, to hearken back to the time when we were oppressed, so as oppressed people, we know what that feels like. And it's not cool to do it to anyone else, to oppress anyone else.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to chime in here?
Rabbi, this is John Berkowitz. So this commandment, my understanding, is the one that's most often repeated in the Torah. So, I mean, I'd say clearly it's important. I think it also feels very unique in that it's not one I think that's as commonly known or discussed, but it's very unique in that it talks about how you treat folks that are not like you. And I think that's something that is uniquely Jewish, and that we don't just look at how we live our lives and how we treat one another, but we also look at this broader context of repairing the world. And in order to do that, you have to think about how you interact with strangers or those who are not like you. And so I think this really ties very well to our broader, directive of, tikkun olam and all of that. You have to think about how you treat others, and particularly strangers. And I think this is something that's very special to our tradition.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Any other hands? Who else would like to add something here?
I would.
Please, Rachel.
I feel like the stranger part, what comes to mind for me is all of the folk tales that I heard growing up, particularly like the magician one with the gifts, and also sort of the Elijah story. It's about a stranger. I feel like there's a lot of tales about welcoming strangers into your home and treating them well. And I feel like that ties in with this.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? So,
It's Benzion, Rabbi.
yeah, Benzion.
I like to play with words, and this is not important, but it's just a nice coincidence. The word stranger, it ends with G-E-R, and G-E-R is ger, which in Hebrew is stranger. I just thought that was kind of funny.
Good,
Oh
good.
my God, I never noticed that, Benzion. Thanks.
I know, it's nonsense, but it's kind of cute.
Well, thank you. So this phrase is repeated in one way or another 36 times in the Torah. And so many people feel that in some ways, this is really the hallmark of not only of this portion, but as John kind of said, and Hesh too, that this is a hallmark of direction and of law and of how we should be in the world of the Jewish tradition. And Rebecca Alpert, who some of you know, a local rabbi who has written widely on gay topics and Jewish topics and baseball topics, Rebecca writes that it's odd for a people to hearken back to one of the worst times in their history as a light to look forward to, as something to remember. And here we are remembering Egypt. And we remember Egypt every year when we celebrate Passover together. And we say, this is the bread of affliction. And we say that our ancestors and we ate coming out of Egypt. And again through the Passover Seder, we are making ourselves, we are remembering when we came out of Egypt. It's not just our ancestors. So we're taking this very personally. And here we have, you shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers. And I really love how both Rachel and John and Heshi have reminded us what it means, that the stranger, we know a lot about being the stranger. Fred.
Yeah, hi, Rabbi. Thanks
Hi.
for everything. I was just thinking that I'm really into the concept of gematria and like the Jewish numerology. And I noticed that you said, and I don't know if it's significant or not, but you mentioned that it's mentioned 36 times, which I think of 18 and, Chai, long life, twice that. Is that significant, or is it just happen to be that way?
Well, it's interesting. It comes from the Talmud, from Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol is the one who says it's 36. I've never done the counting, But I think that you're right, that here both 18 and 36 are kind of magical numbers. And 18 is high and 36 is twice high. And we Jews take those numbers seriously, even today. Those of you who have written a check for tzedakah, particularly if you've done it with a Jewish organization, you know, when those numbers come up, would you give 10, 20, 30? What usually comes up? Will you give 18? Will you give 36? And when it doesn't, and you're just giving to the Democratic Party or someone else you like, I don't want to make any assumptions here, we can always write a check for $18 or $36 to say, this is how I give. Or if we're really able to, 180 or 360 or 720. So, but here that those numbers, which relate then, as I mentioned, it's how we add up the letters. Each letter, of course, has a number. When you add up the letters and they spell life, then that's part of also what tzedakah is. And I also just want to remind us that the word tzedakah is connected to the word tzedek, which means justice. So it's not giving charity. We don't talk about giving charity. We talk about fulfilling an obligation. And that's actually, we can jump down to seeing some of these laws. But I also wanted to, let's see. Oh, actually, and Nancy Fuchs Kramer says the same thing here. It seems odd for people to so emphasize and recall a humiliating past. And then I'm now reading from this book. And Rabbi Nancy Fuchs Kramer, also a local rabbi, has written the following. It is the most natural thing in the world to protect one's own family and clan, and to be unconcerned with or even frightened by the strange and different. It is precisely for this reason that the Torah has to teach us so many times to act counterintuitively against our own immediate interests and inclinations. And the reason it gives is startling. You think the stranger is different from you? You are wrong. The stranger is you. By virtue of being a member of the Jewish people, you were not only at Sinai, but also in Egypt. You remember the lashes of the slave driver's whips as you lugged the giant stones. You know what it feels like to be oppressed, and therefore you must not oppress the stranger, however powerful and secure you now are. And indeed, she continues as the last sentence I'll read. As Nechama Leibovitz, a beloved teacher of many of us who is no longer alive, but her books are alive for us. As Dr. Nechama Leibovitz points out, because you have been oppressed, you may be more tempted to lord it over someone else when you finally have power. This is precisely what is forbidden. So here, this very powerful message. And now I want to look a little more at we're going to go down here and see, the next two lines. Let's, I'm sorry, chapter 23, let's go to verse 1. And Fred, would you read the first verse in English? 23, verse 1.
23 verse 1. Okay, great. You must not carry false rumors. You shall not join hands with the guilty to act as a malicious witness.
Okay, and maybe read the next one also.
Okay. You shall neither side with the mighty to do wrong. You shall not give perverse testimony in a dispute so as to pervert it in favor of the mighty.
And then finish it up with number 3.
Okay. Nor shall you show deference to a poor man in his dispute.
Okay, any thoughts that anyone wants to share after Fred's good reading here? Steve, you want to say something?
Well, no, I want to hear some other comments first.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Hi. Yeah. Well, I like that they also don't want you to favor the poor person. That equal justice means equal justice, whether the person is rich or poor. So a person might be inclined to favor the cause of a disadvantaged person just by virtue of his lack of advantage, and that would not be justice.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. Who else? Danny?
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate all of the comments. I'm curious, kind of bringing it to like a modern contemporary context. These are, I feel like they're lessons that we need to hear every day over and over again. And I'm curious, like, I feel like there's a tension between learning and studying the Torah together, which identifies us as, you know, it sort of puts us within this group of studying and learning about the Torah, which in and of itself creates sort of separation between us and others. So I'm curious, like, how do you resolve that tension between, you know, practicing the Jewish faith, which kind of inherently creates strangers between us and those who are not practicing?
Wow. All right. Benzion, your hand is up. Do you want to respond to Danny or? We'll have a few voices and then I'll be glad to jump in. So Benzion, please.
No, that was a mistake. That was my prior remark. Right?
Okay.
Ignore.
So John?
So I think that when, you know, to the question that's posed or the idea of how you create that tension where you become, as you become a people, you also then create, you know, the outsider or the stranger. I kind of like to think about that through the lens of how we see a lot of other things today, where our goal as a society is not necessarily to become a melting pot where we all give up something of each of ourselves to become something of a sort of bland new, you know, nothing that is not any of us, but is sort of all of us, but rather that we look at ourselves as wanting to maintain our identities, but be able to exist together and celebrate what makes each of us who we are. And then by working together, we can then create a more diverse and, you know, better society, I would say. So I don't necessarily, I think that the tension is a good tension and that we know who we are and we know what makes it important, what's important to us. But I think it's also important that by not saying that we go out and everyone become who we are. So it's making a point that the world will exist with strangers. There will always be people who are unknown to us, and that it's our duty to accept those people and look at those people, you know, for who they are, rather than trying to make them be like us. And that's a very, you know, I'd say in probably a lot of ways, a modern look at it. But since you raised the question, that's where my mind went in this context. The only other thing I would add is I really like how there's these 3 points here to really stress how important justice is. It's not just you know, be fair to everybody and let's move on. It really hits home the point in 3 different ways of how you need to approach things in a just and fair way. And I like how it's underscored by not just being a single line, but 3 lines that connect to this. But I thought they were great questions, Danny.
No. Thank you, John, and thank you, Danny, for your wonderful question, and John for your good analysis here of the whole idea that when you spoke about the melting pot, I think that every great religion, every tradition has rules like this and modes to follow. I've recently become a fan of someone named Valerie Kaur, Kaur, who is a Sikh woman, Sikh. And I've learned about Sikhism from her. I never knew. I knew a little about Hinduism and Buddhism, but not about the Sikh culture and religion. And it's just reminding me that every tradition has its rules and its modes and its phrases of how to be in the world. These are ours. And I love the fact, Danny, that you say we should be reading them every day. Yeah, we should. And actually, we sing those of us who go to a daily service, remember the Exodus every day. We sing the song that we sang last week in the synagogue or 2 weeks ago of coming through that we actually studied together here. Az Yashir Moshe, this is what Moses sang as he led the Israelites across the sea, which opened up. You know, a fantastic, beautiful story, but remembering that we were slaves and what is incumbent upon us, not to make others strangers, but to say, this is our story, you know, in an ideal world. And I think this is what John was pointing to. What's yours? You know, what's your story? What's your origin story? And the other thing is that we, you know, traditionally Jews don't proselytize. We're not looking for people to become Jewish. If people, you know, some of you know, and I know there's at least 2 people here tonight who are in the Introduction to Judaism program at RS. And I bet that one of the teachers has said that the tradition is to turn people away 3 times when people come and say, I'd like to become Jewish. And it's like, traditionally, it's almost sending them away because being Jewish has in history not been an easy thing. It's taking on a burden of otherness. Things, of course, are very different now. We don't push potential converts away. We welcome people to study and to sit with us. And there is a process. You know, it doesn't happen. It's not like, you know, saying 3 words and clicking our heels together and you're magically a Jew. But it's a process of, you know, do I want to become part of this people? And over the years, I've been blessed to do a fair amount of teaching. And I remember I had a wonderful student actually at UCLA who was of Greek Orthodox background. And she came to me and wanted to talk about exploring Judaism. And my words to her were the words that I've heard of, you know, other teachers from other traditions saying, go back and explore your own tradition first. You know, you come from a really, really rich world of teachings and leaders and, you know, and inspired teachers, and then we can talk. But I want you to know where you come from first. And I know that many Jews have been told that by Buddhist teachers, by Hindu teachers, by Catholic teachers, by Protestant teachers, and some of them have returned to Judaism and some haven't. But may our doors always be open, and may we also see that there are still strangers that reside within us. So Heshi and David have their hand up. I don't know whose hand, but I'm going to call on you, please.
I just wanted to add, no, I'm not muted. I just wanted to add that part of the core values for Jews, I believe, is the idea and the understanding that all humanity is created equal, that all people are created equal. So it seems to me that we start and we have an understanding that all people are created equal, so that we can, when we look at other groups in society, while they may not be Jewish, we know that they are still in all created equal. And so I think that Jews come from a place of equality, And so when you have that, I think when you have that teaching, when you have that value that is instilled within you, it's easy to, it's much easier to look at the stranger and to treat the stranger as yourself.
Would that it were so.
Well,
I wish we were all that gracious and welcoming, but it's hard. I'm going to have you, actually, this is for Jerry. Would you scroll down for us to get to verse 9 on the next page? Okay, so here's,
work?
perfect. Thank you. So, so Steve, would you just read that verse for us in English?
Sure. Keep far from a false charge. Do not bring
No,
that.
I'm sorry, verse 9,
Verse 9, okay.
the last one.
You shall not oppress a stranger, for you know the feelings of the stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt.
All right, so it's almost the same wording that we had above, which was, you shall not wrong nor oppress a stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. But this time, there's a little bit of difference. Who wants to pick up this small difference of these, in these two proscriptions?
Well, this speaks more to the feelings of the stranger, as opposed to simply having been a stranger.
So I think all of us can really relate to this. I mean, the idea of feeling like a stranger, I bet, we could spend the rest of our hour just sharing, when have we felt like a stranger? When we used to go into buildings, when we used to go into places, when we used to meet people, and when did we feel other and different? And that's, now I want to kind of go particularly to a really amazing essay that I read, that I think some of you have read, but if you haven't, you're going to learn about it from me today. So it's in this book, which I know many of you have already used. It's called Torah Queeries, the name of our course together. And there's an essay written by a rabbi or teacher on every single portion. And the essay that's written on this portion of Mishpatim is written by Rabbi Dr. David Ellenson. And David was the president of Hebrew Union College for a number of years, and he now is a professor at Brandeis University. He's a really, truly amazing soul. He is something that's called an Elui in Jewish tradition, which is kind of like a brilliant autodidact, somebody who really, I've heard him speak many, many times, and rarely with notes. He's a totally brilliant guy. I only know two other people like that. And one of them is Lance Sussman, who is a local rabbi here in Philadelphia, who I hope some of you get to hear him speak sometime. He's at KI, and he also teaches, he's a historian, teaches without notes. He's amazing, and he's also a beautiful, expansive soul. So David Ellenson, how many of you, actually, I'd like to see hands raised, are familiar with the essay in here and remember reading it in a previous course? I don't see any hands. Okay, good. So I'm not boring you, or I'm reminding you. That's great. So I started to read this essay. I mean, I've been reading them every time in preparation for studying with you. And he begins by focusing on the 18th chapter of Leviticus and the horrible, difficult line, do not lie with a male as one lies with a woman. It is an abomination. Unfortunately, for many of us on this call tonight in our Zoom room, we're very familiar with this, because these words from Leviticus, not only this sentence, but other sentences, call gay sex, homosexuality, our way of being in the world, as abominable. And I thought, wait a minute, why is he doing it on this Torah portion? Well, he says, because of these two verses that we have just read, those verses are more important and give more power and undercut the power of Leviticus. That Leviticus offers a different kind of law that is bound to its own time. And here's what Rabbi Ellenson teaches. First of all, he brings up the fact, and many of you know this, Rebecca Alpert does this, Rabbi Steve Greenberg does this, Rabbi Brad Artson try to argue with the limitations of the text, the Levitical text, why it's wrong, why we need to interpret it in a different way. But Ellenson says, Catholic scholar Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza has suggested a more methodologically radical theological solution to difficult texts. She boldly states that the divinity and authority of any passage in scripture that diminishes the humanity of another ought to be questioned altogether. So what she says is, don't argue with those difficult passages. They deny humanity of someone. In this case, us, gay people. Therefore, we see they're there and we essentially say, that was then and this is now. But more important, says Ellenson, we have these texts that are even more powerful. Elizabeth Fiorenza, says that we need to look elsewhere in scripture at alternative texts that can provide for a principled correction of morally repugnant passages. And Ellenson says that's exactly what Exodus 22:20 and Exodus 23:9, the two things we've just read, do. He then goes on, Ellenson goes on to make a distinction between different kinds of laws. This is where the lawyers would have a good time. A law professor named Dworkin takes a look at the difference between principles and rules, and that Robert Cover of Yale looks at the fact that law is viewed as embodying the highest educational ideal of the community, and law, in his understanding, Cover's understanding, constitutes a bridge to a better world. And that's exactly what we've been talking about. What is the bridge to the better world? It's remembering that we were strangers and we need to welcome and open our hearts to strangers, that we need to understand that being a stranger is a temporary, not necessarily a permanent condition. And that the permanent condition is that we're all created in God's image. The permanent condition is that each of us is a human being with a different path, and perhaps with strange clothes, strange speech, strange behaviors, strange ideas. But at the end of the day, we're all created in God's image. And that this issue, that this essential truth is much more powerful than the status of being a slave, or for that matter, they don't talk about this much, but being a slave owner, that's a temporary thing. And the essential being of who we are is that we're created in God's image. So our behaviors can't be against who God is or what God wants us to be. So that's Rabbi Ellenson's conclusion. I'd be really happy to hear some responses before we go to the end of the Parsha, which is where I want to go before we say good night. So it turns out if you raise your hand, then you come up on my screen and I can see that you're raising your hand. So I'm now really happy that I figured that out. So we've got John's hand up, yay.
So, I mean, I think that's a great view of it, and I fully support it. I guess in the grand scheme of things, and just looking at the Torah, and there's certainly parts of the Torah like that was referred to that I certainly do not agree with. But I also feel like if we agreed with everything that was in the Torah, that in and of itself would not be Jewish. And so I guess, and look at, I am I am an ally of the LGBTQIA community, and I take that very seriously. But so I don't want to speak out of turn, but all I would just say is that to disagree with the Torah at times and to wrestle with the Torah, to me, is inherently Jewish. And so the fact that there's probably something for all of us to disagree with at some point or another is okay. Some things are more strongly worded and some things are not. And clearly this is problematic. But that's the way I feel. I feel like if it were easy, it wouldn't be Jewish, and it wouldn't be for us. So these elements, I think, while they could potentially divide us, the fact that there is so much scholarship, discussion, and engagement around it could actually be the blessing hidden within something that we would take as an abhorrent, is that it actually can bring us together as humans, challenging the Torah in a positive way that in and of itself aligns with what I would say divine intention. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Steve, is your hand up or?
No, it's not, but I really liked, John, what you just had to say, and thought it was very insightful. It seems to me that it's difficult to pick and choose, what you believe in the Torah and what you don't. But the concept of wrestling with it, I agree, is very, very Jewish and very important to developing any understanding of what it means to be Jewish and to be yourself.
Thank you. Fred has his hand up. Fred?
Yeah, hi. I wanted to sort of relate something personal as I've been thinking about the Parshat that we've been talking about. When I was a young man growing up with my family in a conservative synagogue in Ohio many, many years ago, I think what was one of my biggest struggles was I loved Judaism, but I remember the line being read from Leviticus and knew I was queer or gay inside, and I felt like a stranger in my own community. And I'm just thankful that over the years of my life that people have looked at that line and thought about a different way of interpreting it. And I wound up in a whole different place, and very thankful to be in a whole different place in my life over the years, the way sort of Judaism has evolved and the way I've evolved. And I feel one instead of being part of, a stranger to Judaism also. So.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, it's been a while coming. I feel like it's been during my lifetime, during my rabbinate, that I've seen enormous changes. When I was ordained, people couldn't be out. And now someone said to me, I work with students at HUC, and one of them said to me yesterday, I think I'm only one of 2 straight men in our class. I knew he was wrong. There are 3, but anyway, it's a different world out there, and congregations are realizing that. So I do want to look at the end of the portion. So that's the last page that I sent to you, Jerry.
Yep. Hold on a second.
And find it.
Switch gears here. That's the one with the purple or pink.
Yeah, I put some pink in it. Let's see if we can get it for our last as we finish up.
Do you see it?
Yep. Okay. So many of you are familiar with this part of the portion because then it says sorry, I didn't fix those. Then God said to Moses, come up to me with Aaron, Nadav, and Abihu, and 70 elders, and Moses alone can come near God, but the others shall not come near. And then we have, and I highlighted both the Hebrew and the English here. So Moses, oh, I'll have someone else read this. Come on. Let's see. Fred, how about you? You've read before, but you were great. So number 3 in English, please.
Okay, sure. Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of the Lord and all the rules. And all the people answered with one voice, saying, all the things that the Lord has commanded, we will do.
Pretty intense, and we could talk about this for an hour, but what I want to do is to go down, and as long as you're reading, why don't you just keep reading until we get to verse 7, please.
Okay. So continue with 4 down?
Yeah, 4
Okay. Okay,
through
great.
7.
Okay. Moses then wrote down all the commands of the Lord. Early in the morning, he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He designated some young men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls as offerings of well-being to the Lord. Oop, where am I now? Jerry just moved that I lost where I am. What number am I on?
You just read 5. You're now on 6.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people, and they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do.
All right, so the Hebrew here is Kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma. All that God has said, and here we'll have a little Hebrew lesson really quick. The first word is kol, all, and asher diber is that which has been said, and then who said it? You see that middle word there is one of the names for God, Yud, He, Vav, He, 4 letters. And as I've mentioned before, they are all breath letters. They cannot be pronounced. So it's Yah, or that's where Yahweh comes from, trying to pronounce those 4 letters. We read it as Adonai because we have to be able to read it as something, but that's because we put another set of vowels underneath and make it up into another word. So all that God has said, and now here's the fun part, na'aseh v'nishma. And so here we have the first person plural, future and present. So we will do, and we will hear. It's translated here, we will faithfully do, but na'aseh means we will do the action, and v'nishma, it's the same 3 letters at the end. The N, the nun there, nishma, is we, and then shema, as in Shema Yisrael, we will hear. So it's often translated as we will hear and we will hearken. So, or we will do and we will hearken. We will hear and we will do. So both.
Rabbi?
And, yes.
I'm not allowed to put my hand up, or there's no way to put my hand up, at least
All
I
right,
don't
so please
know how to
jump
do that.
in.
But isn't that kind of odd that you say we'll do and we'll listen? Usually it's you'll listen, then you do it.
That's right. That's right. So here, this is such, this is like the parents or the teacher's dream. All right, we'll do it and then we'll listen to you. So here's the people responding to this God who they're still getting used to. And on the one hand, the God who led them out of Egypt, but on the other hand, the God who's schlepping them through the desert, who's so mysterious, who only talks to one person, Moses. So that's, of course, fodder for our continuing conversations. But I also am glad and want to thank Fred for reading this, because it also, here we've got already these smells and sights of what's going on here with this burning flesh and these attempts to, I mean, what is a sacrifice? Is it trying to get God's attention? Is it providing food for God? Is it providing food for the community? And what we're going to have here, we actually can scroll down a little, please, Jerry. So after they do this, you're going to see in 13, Moses and Joshua go up, and then Moses is on the mountain and the cloud covers the mountain and God appears. Oh, I actually skipped over what I wanted to point out, which was before Moses goes up the second time. Scroll down a little bit and I'll find exactly where. Here in verse 11. Okay, so these are great verses actually. So number 9, Moses and Aaron and Nadav and Abihu and 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw God. Under God's feet, there was a likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. The rabbis go nuts about this phrase, by the way. We could spend a whole class just on what the rabbis have. They have so much fun. What does this mean? That under God's feet is sapphire, glistening. We could go on, but then here we have this very Jewish thing that happens. They saw God, and you see at the very end of verse 11 in English, and they ate and drank. All right, we saw God. No, let's eat. So then Moses goes up, and Moses is gone for a while. And then we know that we've got some really exciting things happening in the next few weeks. And I will see you in 2 weeks. So I really appreciate everyone coming tonight. If you want, we can spend, a few more minutes with some questions for those of you who have time and those of you who have other responsibilities or are being called. I will see you in 2 weeks. So I'll stay on for a few minutes, but
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Rabbi.
you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's wonderful.
Wonderful.
So Shavua Tov, have a good week.
Thank you. Too.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Oh, I have to put a plug in for the Purim spiel.
Oh, please do.
Yeah, well, that's it.
All right.
It's always been good. So if you haven't come this year.
Well, and Nikki de Blasi is teaching on Shabbos morning, I saw, and she's terrific. She is really, really terrific. So she's the Hillel rabbi at NYU, and she's fabulous.
I saw her source sheet, and it's going to be fun.
Oh, great, great. So that's Shabbos morning. And any other questions while we're still here?
And we have you for a couple Torah studies too in March.
Yes. Yeah, I'm coming up in a couple of weeks. I don't have the calendar. Yep. Oh, I do have the calendar.
I will send you an email, but Mindy asked, I'm going to be your tech angel for those.
Oh, all right. Well, Mindy asked and I said, oh, I already sent everything. I realized, no. She's talking about March 6th.
I'll send you some information.
Okay. March 6th felt to me like 2022. It's like, what?
Yes, it's way off.
I'm on a kind of one day at a time here. So I want to know, so Francis is in the intro class and I hope that it's going well for you.
It is, yeah. It's a nice, I don't know if refresher is the right word. It helps contextualize the holidays more.
Good. And
Rabbi, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm curious, with this group in particular, I really value the opportunity to be critical and think how it applies, especially to today's context. I'm also curious how open this group is, or how open you are to facilitating dialogue about, like, in the Israeli context, and especially with Zionism as a political project. There was a lot of feelings that were rising within me about the conflict between Israel as a political project and what Zionism means for Palestinians. There was so much that I could have just copied and pasted into that modern context. but I don't know, like, yeah, I'm curious how you would engage with that topic in this group.
Well, it's a really, really, really important topic for us as contemporary Jews. There's been a lot of conversation over the years about how a lot of mainstream Jewish organizations have tried to distance themselves from dealing with some of the harder issues. And I think that most thoughtful, serious Jews are really struggling with the contemporary situation in Israel, with a really, right now, terribly corrupt government. I mean, there's often been corrupt governments, but this one is particularly bad. There are demonstrations every single week in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv against Netanyahu personally, because he is just a creep. And I mean, I know more about the behavior of the left in Israel than not. We don't see a lot of that here. I mean, you know, we often, as American Jews, are relieved when Israel isn't on the front page. And, you know, I mean, many of you know that a very large percentage of the Israeli population has received now 2 vaccines, and that the rollout for the Palestinian population was abysmal. Although it's a little better this week than it was last week. But so really complex, and it's not my area of greatest expertise. I don't know, honestly, what's going on at RS. I mean, maybe Jerry does more than I do, you know, whether there are conversations happening within the synagogue. There are definitely pods of good conversation happening here in Philadelphia among thoughtful people, and including Israelis who live here, who have experience, you know, across the spectrum.
There's a really big Israeli community in Philly.
Yeah, and they're not monolithic in terms of, you know, who they are. I mean, they're mostly non-Orthodox, but in the last, actually, I don't know now how many guys ago it was, but several, oh, well, actually, we had a consul here, an Israeli consul. And there was one when I was working for the Jewish community in Philadelphia that I got to know, who was very, very open-minded. And there was actually some people from Road of Shalom who were picketing his office every week. He had an office on, do you remember exactly where it was, Jerry? It was right near my office. It was at 15th near Walnut.
1511 Walnut.
Israeli consul. Do you remember that?
1511 Walnut, I think.
Well, that was my office.
Oh, that was your office.
1511 Walnut, but he was on 15th Street, right near
close,
Walnut. And there were some folks from Road of Shalom who were very lefty and were picketing him every week. And I had gotten to know him, and I mentioned that I knew some of those people, and he said, why don't they come in and talk to me? I want to talk to them. And I mean, he's representing the Israeli government. Now, he's several people ago. They've since closed the office. Unfortunately, I don't think that the Israeli government has an office in Philadelphia anymore. But the last person who was in that office, the assistant counsel, was a gay guy who got married here in City Hall. Yeah. Lovely, lovely guy who, yes, he was a diplomat, and he was very diplomatic, but he also clearly understood the complexity of what it means to be a Jew and an Israeli in contemporary Israel, where we have been occupying, we've been occupiers now for 50 years. I mean, it's a really horrendous, horrible situation that's extremely complex. And there are folks who are talking about it. I just want you to know that you're not the only Jew asking questions, asking good, hard questions. And we need to be talking about it to each other and finding out, all right, how am I going to learn more so that my own opinions and understanding can be more nuanced? What do I want to read? Reading Palestinian authors and poets, not just the pundits, and Israelis for that matter. But the mainstream Jewish community, I think many people have been afraid to go deep. I'm sorry to say, and I'd be happy to hear from, I wish I were wrong.
I don't know that RS is doing much at the moment. They have had some fairly controversial speakers. I missed it because I was traveling. I think I saw something fairly recently from the Philly, I don't know the right order of the words, but the Jewish Federation here. I think they have some folks who are running or who have been elected in Israel who are going to speak. Not too far off. So if you went to their website and looked for upcoming programs, I think it was Federation or something under them. They've got some things going on with that.
Thank you. I also appreciate how you frame that, Rabbi. I think it's
What's that?
I appreciate just how Rabbi Sue frames, just the whole context of Philly and RS in general. And that it is just an ongoing conversation where many people may be afraid to speak up. I also know that a lot of younger Jewish Americans are less afraid to speak up. And there's a rising, organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace, like those memberships are growing very rapidly. I lived in California for 10 years before moving to Philly last year, and just in the Bay Area, there's such a evolution of thinking and dialogue. So I'm grateful that you're open to asking questions and learning together, because I think it's so important. That's one of the biggest tensions that I felt in kind of like moving to Philly, rediscovering Judaism again, and I'm grateful for Rachel for inviting me to this group, is my identity as a Jew, as a US citizen, and as like a human rights advocate, democracy advocate. There's a lot of tension when you look at Israel as a project. But I think that its lesson, I think, helps give these conversations so much more foundation in Judaism, in like what it means to be Jewish, so that we can apply them into these different contexts objectively. And I think that's really, really important, and I'm grateful for that.
Well, and I think just, the fact that JVP is JVP, I mean, it's Jewish Voices for Peace. And even, for anyone who disagrees with them, they still honor, the fact that there's rabbis who belong. I mean, this has split some Jewish communities, and it's exactly what we were talking about tonight. Writ large, really large. What does it mean to see others as us, and to hear the voices? And there's also, there's a number of organizations. There's actually a wonderful organization that has done some work in Philadelphia called Combatants for Peace. And they are former, it's an Israeli organization, but they have an American group. So Israelis who have fought in the armed services there, in the Army, they don't have a Navy, and who are now full-time peace workers. And then there's an organization called the Parents Circle, which is also a Jewish Palestinian organization of parents who have lost children. And they do a lot of international work and have really crossed a lot of boundaries. I know somebody who's involved in that. So, there are a lot of people of goodwill who are saying, we can't sustain this occupation.
Yep.
What can we do about it to honor both the reality of a Jewish state in the Middle East and figuring out how to live with our neighbors, all of them.
Absolutely.
So anyway, we could talk more, but
I appreciate it. Thank you for.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for your question. Thank you for coming, both Danny and Rachel. And Susan, thank you for your input. And Jerry, thanks for being an angel tonight.
My pleasure. Great job.
I love learning from you.
Oh, thank
With
you.
you.
May everyone have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I'll have a
Bye-bye.
camera next time. So I'll see you guys next time on camera.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank
Good.
you so much, you guys.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rabbi.